Know that you are making great sacrifices to resist the power grab that's being perpetrated by Donald Trump, by Governor Abbott, and by Texas Republicans.
In Texas, a sitting congressman just accused Donald Trump of demanding his allies rig the 2025 midterms, calling it a five-alarm fire for American democracy. At the same time, a young African leader, Ibrahim Traoré, is defying the West in ways Washington has not seen in decades. But how are both linked in a way we never thought? Let's find that out. In Texas, the fight over congressional district lines has erupted into a political showdown with stakes that extend far beyond the Lone Star State. This is not the normal redistricting that follows the U.S. Census every 10 years. Instead, in 2025, midway between census cycles, the Republican-controlled legislature is pushing through a mid-decade redraw aimed squarely at reshaping the battlefield for the 2026 midterm elections. At the heart of the clash is President Donald Trump, whose allies in Texas are advancing a map widely assessed by election analysts to give Republicans as many as 5 additional U.S. House seats. Securing those seats could help cement a durable GOP majority in Congress, one that would carry through the latter half of Trump's current term and potentially make it far easier for him to pass legislation, appoint allies, and push his political agenda without gridlock. For Representative Greg Casar, a Democrat who represents Texas's 35th congressional district in East Austin, this is not simply a partisan maneuver. It's an attack on Democratic representation itself. His district is majority Hispanic, and the proposed maps, he argues, are designed to fracture that population's voting power. In his view, the new lines would dilute Latino voices in a way that violates the Voting Rights Act, undermining protections intended to ensure minority communities have a fair shot at electing their preferred candidates. Donald Trump should not get to pick who your member of Congress is, Casar told national audiences, calling the plan a five-alarm fire for American democracy. The response from Democrats has been dramatic. More than 50 members of the Texas House fled the state, traveling to safe locations beyond the reach of Texas law enforcement to deny Republicans the quorum they need to pass the maps. Their absence has frozen the legislative process and turned the redistricting plan into a national spectacle. Governor Greg Abbott has ordered civil arrest warrants for the absent lawmakers, measures that carry no legal weight outside of Texas, but send a pointed message: return or face detention the moment you step back into the state. For Republicans, the move is about fair representation and updating maps to reflect new population shifts. For Democrats, it's a blatant power grab. The national press has zeroed in on the unusual nature of a mid-decade redistricting and on Trump's visible role in encouraging GOP lawmakers to lock in advantages ahead of the midterms. But while the headlines frame this as a domestic dispute over political lines, Casar and others warn that the implications could stretch far beyond American borders. A Congress reshaped by maps like these doesn't just decide the fate of domestic legislation, it has the power to steer U.S. foreign policy. From approving trade deals and shaping military aid packages to authorizing sanctions and setting the tone of America's engagement abroad, the makeup of the House can alter how the U.S. positions itself on the global stage. That's where the deeper questions start to emerge. If Trump and his allies secure a map in Texas that gives them long-term structural control over more House seats, what kinds of policies will that Congress back? Which leaders around the world will find themselves on the receiving end of a friendlier Washington, and which will face sharper opposition? The answers may lie thousands of miles away, in a place that, on the surface, couldn't seem more distant from Texas: Burkina Faso. There, a 36-year-old leader named Ibrahim Traoré is charting a course for his nation that defies long-standing Western influence, aligning with new partners and rewriting the rules of engagement with powers like the United States. His rise, and the movement he's inspiring, offer a glimpse into why control over Congress matters so much to Trump, and why the fight over district lines in Austin could ripple to the streets of Ouagadougou. To grasp why a congressional map in Texas could have any bearing on the streets of Ouagadougou, you have to understand the shift underway in Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traoré. At just 36 years old, Traoré has become one of the most talked about leaders on the African continent, not because he follows the traditional playbook of governance favored in Washington or Paris, but because he has tossed that playbook out entirely. Since coming to power, Traore has moved with striking speed to dismantle the structures that tied Burkina Faso's political, security, and economic systems to former colonial powers. One of his first and most decisive acts was to order the withdrawal of French troops from Burkina Faso soil, ending a security arrangement that had lasted for years, but which many citizens saw as a one-sided deal serving foreign interests more than their own. Instead of leaning on traditional Western military partnerships, Traore has pursued new defense agreements with regional allies and forged closer ties with non-Western partners, particularly Russia. The symbolism was unmistakable. Burkina Faso would no longer rely on the same outside powers that had dominated its security landscape for decades. His economic moves have been equally bold. Traore's government has sought to renegotiate or outright cancel contracts in sectors like mining, where multinational corporations, many based in the West, have long reaped the majority of the profits from Burkina Faso resources. By placing greater control in the hands of state-owned enterprises and insisting on terms that keep more wealth within the country, he has signaled that resource sovereignty is a non-negotiable part of his agenda. These steps haven't just shifted policy, they've created a new narrative. Traore speaks openly and unapologetically about Africa's right to chart its course without permission from global powers. He frames his mission as a form of liberation, not just from colonial legacies, but from the modern systems that perpetuate dependency. This rhetoric has found eager audiences in neighboring Mali, Niger, and beyond, where leaders and citizens alike are questioning whether the old alliances are worth preserving. For Washington, this is more than an ideological difference. The United States views Africa as strategically vital, home to key minerals like uranium and cobalt, important maritime routes, and pivotal counterinsurgency partnerships. In an era of renewed competition with China and Russia, U.S. policymakers see African alignments as critical pieces in the global puzzle. When a leader like Traore pushes his country toward alternative partnerships and away from Western influence, it disrupts carefully cultivated strategic plans. This is where the connection to Texas's redistricting fight starts to sharpen. The composition of the U.S. Congress has a direct impact on how America responds to foreign leaders who break from its preferred orbit. A House of Representatives tilted more heavily toward Trump's political base would be far more inclined to back a tougher, less compromising stance toward governments like Traore's. That could mean faster movement on sanctions, reduced aid, or diplomatic isolation, steps that require not just a willing president, but a legislative branch ready to go along. And Trump has already signaled, through his political alliances and public positioning, that he favors a foreign policy rooted in leverage and transactional deals, not the slower consensus building often associated with bipartisan diplomacy. If he has a secure majority in Congress, one strengthened by engineered maps in states like Texas, the U.S. could more easily pivot to a confrontational posture toward African leaders seen as aligning with rival powers. The point isn't that the Texas map will directly redraw Africa's borders, but that it could redraw the contours of America's global approach. A handful of extra Republican seats in the House could shift committee leadership, change foreign affairs priorities, and speed the passage of measures aimed at curbing the influence of leaders like Traore. In other words, the battle in Austin is not happening in isolation. It's part of a much larger story about who gets to shape the U.S. government's response to a changing world, and in that world, Burkina Faso is no longer a passive player. It's a country actively rewriting its role, with a leader who refuses to wait for outside approval. That leads to the next question. How exactly is Traore building this model of independence, and why is it catching on across Africa in ways that worry Washington? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Ibrahim Traoré's political approach is not improvised. It follows a deliberate, layered strategy designed to achieve one goal: sovereignty that can't be easily dismantled by external pressure. He knows that removing foreign troops or rejecting certain trade deals wins headlines, but headlines alone don't protect a nation from the long arm of global politics. The real challenge is creating systems that make those choices sustainable, systems that don't crumble when threatened with sanctions, aid cuts, or diplomatic isolation. The first pillar of Traore's playbook is security independence. He's not just replacing one foreign military presence with another, he's building a regional defense posture that reduces reliance on any single outside power. Through joint security agreements with Mali and Niger, both led by governments similarly skeptical of Western military influence, Traore is creating a bloc that can respond to regional threats without defaulting to Western intervention. This model is already shifting the security conversation in the Sahel from "which foreign troops will protect us" to "how will we protect ourselves?" The second pillar is economic reorientation. In Burkina Faso's mining sector, for example, Traore has pushed for increased state participation in operations and stricter terms for foreign companies. These moves aren't purely about profit. They're about leverage. When a state controls more of its economic lifeblood, it can better withstand external financial pressure. If an adversary threatens sanctions, the blow is softened when critical revenues are not tied to that adversary's approval or cooperation. The third pillar is narrative control. Traore understands that sovereignty is as much about perception as it is about policy. He speaks directly to the public through addresses, public forums, and symbolic acts, framing his leadership as part of a collective struggle against exploitation. This isn't just domestic political theater, it's international signaling. Other African nations see a leader speaking with unapologetic clarity about independence and acting in ways that match his words. That consistency has made him a reference point for sovereignty-minded movements across the continent. The fourth pillar is alliance diversification. Traore's government has actively sought out new partners beyond the traditional West African-Western axis. These include trade and investment talks with countries in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. By broadening Burkina Faso's diplomatic and economic network, he reduces the risk that a single powerful country or bloc can isolate his nation without consequence. It's a safeguard against the kind of pressure campaign that Washington or Paris might mount if relations sour further. And the final pillar, perhaps the most important, is regional inspiration. Traore doesn't just govern Burkina Faso, he projects an image of what's possible for African countries that decide to break free from old dependencies. In Mali, Niger, and even farther afield, civil society groups and political factions are openly discussing how to adapt aspects of his approach to their contexts. It's not about copying policy word for word, but about adopting the mindset that sovereignty is achievable and worth defending. This, more than any single decision, is what worries Washington. When one leader takes a defiant stand, the situation can be managed. When that stand becomes a model for a whole region, the geopolitical landscape shifts. It creates a chain reaction of independence movements that can realign trade flows, resource access, and diplomatic voting blocs in global forums like the United Nations. For the United States, accustomed to a degree of influence in African affairs, such a shift represents a strategic challenge. And it's here that the connection back to Texas becomes more than symbolic. A U.S. Congress shaped by partisan map-making in states like Texas would have the authority to accelerate or intensify measures aimed at containing leaders like Traore. The more secure Trump's allies are in Congress, the more freedom the administration has to act decisively abroad without facing domestic pushback. Which leads to a critical question. If a politically engineered Congress is the tool, how exactly could it be used to shape U.S. actions toward Burkina Faso and the broader African sovereignty wave? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Once the domestic political map is secured, its influence doesn't stop at the water's edge. In Washington, a loyal majority in the House of Representatives is not just a vote-counting advantage, it is a strategic asset that can shape how the United States engages with the rest of the world. The committees, appropriations, and authorizations that flow from a cooperative Congress become tools that can be wielded far from American soil. If President Trump enters the second half of his term with a fortified House majority, one bolstered by the kind of partisan redistricting underway in Texas, he gains more than just legislative breathing room. He gains the ability to launch, accelerate, and sustain foreign policy initiatives without the constant threat of them being blocked or watered down by opposition lawmakers. The process begins quietly. Key House committees, like the Foreign Affairs Committee, can hold hearings that frame certain countries as strategic risks. In the case of Burkina Faso, testimony might center on allegations of authoritarian drift, human rights concerns, or destabilizing partnerships with Russia. While such language might sound procedural, it sets the stage for concrete measures by giving them an aura of necessity. From there, the House can move to authorizing targeted sanctions. These might be aimed at specific individuals in Traore's government, state-run companies, or sectors like mining and energy that underpin the Burkina Faso economy. Sanctions of this type are often justified as tools to encourage reform, but in practice they can choke off revenue streams, deter foreign investment, and create internal economic pressures that weaken a government's ability to resist outside demands. Aid control is another lever. The House holds significant influence over how foreign aid is allocated and conditioned. A cooperative majority could choose to reduce or freeze development funding, military assistance, or technical support for Burkina Faso, tying any restoration of aid to policy concessions, such as distancing from non-Western allies or opening its markets to certain foreign companies. Appropriations also allow for more discrete measures. Portions of the defense and intelligence budgets can be earmarked for capacity building with opposition groups, information campaigns targeting a government's legitimacy, or expanded intelligence gathering. These authorizations are often buried within larger budget bills, escaping public scrutiny, but still providing the executive branch with operational tools to shape outcomes in foreign capitals. In the geopolitical arena, timing matters. A president with a friendly Congress can move quickly in response to perceived challenges abroad, rather than getting bogged down in protracted debates. For leaders like Traore, that means the window for maneuvering, to build alliances, strengthen domestic institutions, or consolidate public support could shrink dramatically. None of these measures happens in isolation. Sanctions can be paired with diplomatic isolation campaigns in international bodies. Aid restrictions can be reinforced by trade barriers. Intelligence operations can feed into narratives that justify further action. With a stable majority in the House, the coordination between legislative and executive branches becomes seamless, allowing a sustained pressure strategy that's far harder to resist. This is why the fight over district lines in Texas is not just a battle over local representation. Those lines, once drawn, determine who sits in Congress. And who sits in Congress determines which levers of foreign policy are pulled, how hard they are pulled, and against whom. The blunt reality is that political engineering at home can lay the groundwork for political engineering abroad. And when the domestic map tilts decisively toward one faction, the foreign targets of that faction's agenda, whether in Africa, Asia, or elsewhere, will feel the effects. So who holds the pen that shapes our future? Can a map in Texas redraw the politics of Africa? Let us know in the comments section. Are we choosing our leaders, or are they choosing us? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.